Zone 11.
Warren and Charlie, good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Morris Spence from Waterloo, Nebraska. Some 30 years ago, you disbanded your Buffett partnership, saying that you felt out of step with the market and you feared a permanent loss of capital. Given today's market and current valuations, if Berkshire Hathaway was a partnership of 100 partners instead of a corporation, would you consider disbanding it as you did 30 years ago? And if not, why not? And was that the right decision back then?
Well, if our activities were limited to marketable securities and I had less than 100 partners, and we were operating with this kind of money so that there was a real limitation on what we could do, I would simply tell the partners and let them make the decision. That would be easy enough. We're not in that position. We've got a number of wonderful businesses, and those businesses will grow in value, and in some cases very significantly in value. And it's not a feasible way. People have their own way if they decide that since we're unable to find things, that they'd rather go on to something else. They have their own way of getting out, and they can get out at certainly a premium to the amount of money they put into the business over the years. So if I were running a marketable securities portfolio now and we're limited to that, I would explain very carefully to my partners how limited my ability to make money in this market would be, and then I would ask them to do whatever they wish to do. Some of them might want to pull out and others might want to stay. In the 1969 period when I closed up, I had a somewhat similar situation in terms of finding things, and B, I really felt that the expectations of people had been so raised by the experience we'd had over the previous 13 years that it made me very uncomfortable, and I felt unable to dampen those expectations. And I really just didn't find it comfortable to operate where my partners, even though they might nod their heads understandingly and say that, we really know why you aren't making any money while everybody else is. I didn't think I wanted to face the internal pressure that would come from that. I don't feel any such internal pressure in running Berkshire. Charlie?
Yeah, I think there are some similarities between 1969 and 70 and the present time, but I don't think that means that 1973-4 lies right ahead of us. We can't predict that. You can argue it worked out wonderfully for Warren to quit in 69 and then have 73-4 to come into with his powder dry. I don't think we're likely to be quite that fortunate again.
Yeah, it was a long time from 69 though to 73. I mean, it sounds easy looking back, but the Nifty 50, as you may remember, sort of hit their peak in 72. So although there was a sinking spell for a while in that 69-70 period, the market came back very strong. Although there was a sinking spell for a while in that 69-70 period, the market came back very strong. That's part of the game. I mean, it stayed cheap a long time. You will find waves of optimism and pessimism, and they'll never be exactly like they were before, but they will come in some form or other. That does not mean we're sitting around with a bunch of cash because we expect stocks to go down, though. We keep looking for things. We're looking for things right now. We're talking to people right now about things that where we could expend substantial sums of money, but it's much more difficult in this period. Zone 12.
Good morning. My name is Jenna. I'm from Long Island, New York. And I was reading through your annual report. You made reference to Wagner and some country western song I never heard of. I was just wondering what kind of music influences you, and are you planning on doing like a musical video?
Well, I think with the performance I gave earlier here in the movie, I don't think there's any future for me. But I do have a very musical family. And since you asked, I will point out that my son Peter's recent CD is available at the Disney booth outside, and Peter had a very successful experience here on public television in March, and will be on tour later on. And My wife is extremely musical, but I don't think I've got much of a future in it. So far, I get no one ever asked me to come back. I mean, I've had a lot of introductory appearances, but very few encores. I like all kinds of music. I've always liked music. We started out around the house singing church hymns, and in 1942, my two sisters who are here today joined me in a 15-minute program on WOW, then the leading radio station in Omaha, and we sang America the Beautiful, and that my dad got elected to Congress on the back of that program. We like to take credit for it. You see my sisters at the end of the meeting. Charlie, what kind of music do you like?
Well, the one thing I agree with is that if we're going to star Warren, it should be in a musical. The straight acting won't do.
It took me an hour to get that bald for Andy, incidentally. It takes a long time to get bald. Dressing room. Zone 13, please.
Good morning, Mr. Buffett and Mr. Munger. My name is Jack Sutton from Brooklyn, New York. Thank you for hosting today's meeting. With reference to communication stocks, because of the growth of cellular communications and the internet, certain stocks hold the prospect of substantially above average revenue and earnings growth. AT&T and Nokia, as an example, earn respectable margins and return on common equity and would seem to fit Berkshire's criteria from a financial perspective. Has Berkshire reviewed stocks in the area of communications, and would you consider an investment in this area at some time in the future?
Yeah, there's certainly no question that amazing things have happened in communications. It's interesting that you mentioned AT&T, because AT&T's return on equity over the last 15 years has been very, very poor. Now, they've had special charges time after time and said don't count this, but the overall return on equity, if you calculate it for AT&T for the last 15 years, it's not been good at all. They were the leader in the field, but so far what has happened has hurt them, at least relative to their competition, far more than it's helped them. We have a fellow on our board, Walter Scott, who's right here in the front row, if I can't quite see him, but who knows a lot more about this. He used to try to explain to me these changes that were taking place. We'd ride down to football games on Saturday, and Walter would patiently explain to me, like he was talking to a sixth grader, what was going to happen in communications. And the problem was that he had a fourth grader in the car with him, namely me. So I never got it, but Walter did. And he's done very well in MFS and Level 3. And I think for people who understand it and are reasonably early, there could very well be substantial money to be made. There's been an awful lot of money made in this town of Omaha by people, not one of them. And I have no insights that I bring to that game that I think are in any way superior and in probably many cases not even equal to those of other participants. There's a lot of difference between making money and spotting a wonderful industry. The two most important industries in the first half of this century in the United States, in the world, probably were the auto industry and the airplane industry. I mean, here you have these two discoveries, both in the first decade, essentially in the first decade of the century. And if you'd foreseen in 1905 or thereabouts what the auto would do to the world, let alone or this country, or what the airplane would do, or thereabouts what the auto would do to the world, let alone or this country, or what the airplane would do, got rich by riding the back of that auto industry, and probably even fewer got rich by participating in the airline industry over that time. I mean, millions of people are flying around every day, but the number of people who have made money carrying them around is very limited, and the capital that's been lost in that business, the bankruptcies, it's been a terrible business. It's been a marvelous industry. So you do not want to necessarily equate the prospects of growth for an industry with the prospects for growth in your own net worth by participating in it. Charlie?
Well, it reminds me of a time in World War II when there were these two aircraft officers I knew, and they didn't have anything to do at the time. And some general came in to visit, and he said to one of them, he says, "Lieutenant Jones, what do you do?" He says, "I don't do anything." He turned to the second one, and he says, "What do you do?" And he says, "I help Lieutenant Jones." That's been my contribution on this. "What do you do?" And he says, "I help Lieutenant Jones." That's been my contribution on.
You can address me as Lieutenant Jones for the rest of the meeting. Yeah. Incidentally, some people have thanked us for providing this meeting. I want to thank you because the quality of I think we have the best shareholders meeting in the country, and the quality of the meeting is absolutely in direct proportion to the quality of the shareholders. We would have nothing without this participation, and I really thank you. It's a big effort to come here for a lot of you, and I thank you for that. Our plan, incidentally, will be to take a break at noon. They have a lot of food outside that they will sell you, and then we'll come back in 30 minutes or thereabouts, or 45 minutes, depending on how the lines are out there, and then we'll reconvene for the afternoon. And those of you who are not in this main hall, if you want to come over and join the main hall, there will be enough seats for everybody in the afternoon, and then Charlie and I will continue till about 3:30. Let's go back to Zone 1, please.
Mr. Buffett, over here. Good morning. I'm Alan Maxwell. I live in Omaha. When you walk down the street, heads turn to watch you. Do you ever get tired of being Warren Buffett? If you could come back again, would you want to be Warren Buffett?
I think I'd probably want to be Mrs. B. She made it to 104, so And incidentally, I think there were 3 siblings at her funeral. That's some set of genes. You don't have to worry about the furniture mart. You see a lot of the publicity bit here for a couple of days around the time of the meeting, but life goes on in a very normal way, and I've had a lot of fun. I have fun every day of my life. I had a lot of fun when I was 25, but I have just as much fun now, and I think if my health stays good, it'll keep being the same way, because I get to do what I want to do, and I get to do it with people I like and admire and trust, and it doesn't get any better than that. Charlie? I get to do it with people I like and admire and trust, and it doesn't get any better than that. Charlie? Do you want to come back as Lieutenant Jones?
I think we all want to play our own games.
We'll go to Zone 2 with those remarks.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm Liam O'Connor. I come from County Kerry in Ireland, and I must admit the sun shines a little bit more over here than it does on the other side of the world. I was wondering today if you could shed some light on accounting for goodwill. I was wondering today if you could shed some light on accounting for goodwill, your principles, owner principles, and as well as the fact with the current merger of General Re. It seems to me there are several different methods that are used worldwide,
right.
Through amortization to direct write-off, and the fact when a merger like this is taken, it kind of skews the balance sheet. And I was wondering, in your view, what would you recommend as a more appropriate method for accounting for goodwill? And secondly, if I could direct it to Charlie, one of the ideas, why not tie goodwill to the share? One of the ideas, why not tie goodwill to the share price and have an intangible and a tangible part of shareholders' equity, the value and the share value of a company?
Okay, I'll take the first part, and it's a good question about goodwill and the treatment of goodwill for accounting purposes. I actually wrote on that subject, I think it was in 1983 in the annual report, and if you click onto the BerkshireHathaway.com, you can look at the older letters, and you will see a discussion of what I think should be the way goodwill is handled. And then we've discussed it at various other times in the owner's manual. To give it to you briefly, in the UK, for example, goodwill is written off instantly, so it never appears in book value, and there's no subsequent charge for it. If I were setting the accounting rules, I would treat all acquisitions as purchases, which is what we've done virtually without exception at Berkshire. I would treat all acquisitions as purchases. I would set up the economic goodwill, because we are paying for goodwill when we buy a General Re. I mean, we are paying billions and billions of dollars for it, or when we buy a Geico, or when we buy an executive jet. That is what we are buying as what I call economic goodwill. I believe it should stay on the balance sheet as reflective of the money you've laid out to buy it, but I don't think it should be amortized. I think in cases where it is permanently impaired and clear that it's lost its value, it should be charged off at that time. But generally speaking, in our own case, the economic goodwill that we now have far exceeds the amount that we put on the books originally, and therefore even by a greater amount exceeds the amount that remains on the books after amortization. I do not think an amortization charge is appropriate at Berkshire for the goodwill that we have attached to our businesses. Most of those businesses have increased their economic goodwill, in some cases by dramatic amounts, since we've purchased them. But I think the cost ought to be on the balance sheet. It shows what we paid for them. I think it should be recorded there. I don't think that the coming change in accounting is likely to be along the lines that I've suggested here, but I do think it's the most rational way to approach the problem. And I think that because there is this great difference between purchase and pooling accounting, that some really stupid things are done in the corporate world. And I have talked to managers who deplored the fact that they were using their stock in a deal and going through some various maneuvers to get pooling accounting, because they thought it was economically a dumb thing to do. But they did it rather than record amortization charges that would result from purchase accounting. And they're very frank about that in private. They don't say as much about it in public. Charlie?
Yeah, generally speaking, I think that what Warren argues for would be the best system. Namely, set up the goodwill as an asset and don't amortize it in the ordinary case. However, there would be plenty of cases when the cases wouldn't be ordinary cases, when amortization would be rational, in fact should be required. So I don't think there is any one easy answer to this one. And there's a lot of crazy distortion in corporate practice because of all the changes. I mean, Australia has cowboy accounting, and Europe has this write it all off immediately accounting, which is, what would you call it, half cowboy accounting, and maybe mining promoter accounting. We think the system should be better than that.
Zone 3.
Good morning.
Morning.
My name is Mike from Omaha, and it's been said that you're the white knight of the investment world because you rescue companies from hostile takeovers. Are there any companies you are now trying to help out, and would you please name those companies?
Do you have a cell phone that you're going to place orders with, or? No, we really, what we really want to buy into is our wonderful businesses, or at least extremely good businesses, and we want them to have managements we like, and we want the price to be attractive. And we are not in the business of being white knights. We're in the business of being investors in things that look sensible to us. And I don't think I've been approached by anybody in connection with that. we do get approached occasionally. I should say we get approached when somebody occasionally, it's when somebody has a takeover bid and they say, would you like to top it or something, to which our answer invariably is no. Charlie?
Well, we're very good at saying no.
Charlie's better than I am even. Zone 4.
Good morning. My name is Matt Haverty. I'm from Kansas City. 20 years ago, China unleashed capitalism within its borders. Since then, I believe it has benefited more from that economic system than any major country in history. I also believe that this momentum, combined with China's size and demographics, will make it the most fertile economic environment in the world during the next few decades. Nonetheless, there are many Chinese companies with easy-to-understand businesses and 20% per annum sales growth this decade, trading at 5 times or less last year's earnings. What is your assessment of the risk-reward of investing directly in Chinese companies?
Well, I don't know that much about them, but certainly if I could buy companies that were earning 20% on equity and had promises, gave promise of being able to continue to do that while reemploying most of the capital, and they were selling at 5 times earnings, and I felt good about the quality of the earnings, capital, and they were selling at 5 times earnings, and I felt good about the quality of the earnings. My guess is that it's not a lot in terms of the ones that meet those tests you named for Berkshire to profitably participate. And whether you could buy all of those companies from the U.S., I think there could well be a lot of problems in that. But I would say anytime you can buy good businesses, really good businesses, which we define as businesses that earn high returns on capital at 5 times earnings, and you believe in the quality of the earnings, and they can reemploy a significant portion of those earnings additionally at the 20% rate, you will make a lot of money if you're right in your assessment on that. Charlie?
Yeah, I don't know much about China.
But that is not to knock it in any way, shape, or form, because there could well be opportunities in areas like that if you can identify those kind of businesses. We would have trouble identifying those businesses ourselves, but that doesn't mean that you will have trouble, or other people that are much more familiar with the economy there would have trouble. So I encourage you to look at your own area of expertise in something like that, and you'll do much better if the conditions you describe exist and you can identify the right company. You will do much better in that than you will in American markets, in my view. Zone 5.
Good morning. My name is Fred Castano from East Point, Michigan, and I appreciate this opportunity. My name is Fred Castano from East Point, Michigan, and I appreciate this opportunity. With Berkshire future investments to be in the form of the General Re acquisition, or would you still consider nibbling in the stock market?
Well, we don't want to nibble, but we would like to take big gulps in the stock market from time to time. But we've always wanted to acquire entire businesses. People never seemed to really believe that back when we were buying See's Candy or the Buffalo News or National Indemnity. But that's been our number one preference right along. It's just that we found that much of the time we could get far more for our money in terms of wonderful businesses by buying pieces in the stock market than we could by negotiated purchase. There may be some movement in terms of the availability of purchase. There may be some movement in terms of the availability of. You will never make the kind of buy in a negotiated purchase that you can in a bad stock, that you can make via stocks in a weak stock market. It just isn't going to happen. The person on the other side cares too much, whereas in the stock market in a 1973 or 4, you were dealing with the marginal seller, and whatever price they established for the business, you could buy at. I couldn't have bought the entire Washington Post company for $80 million in 1974, but I could buy 10% of it from a bunch of people who were just operating, based on calculating betas or doing something of the sort, and they were in a terrible market, and it was possible to buy a piece of it on that valuation. You never get that kind of buy in a negotiated purchase. We always are more interested in large negotiated deals than we are in stock purchases, but we we are not going to find a way probably to use all the money that way. And we occasionally may get chances to put big chunks of money into attractive businesses which we buy through the stock market, 5–10% of the company or something of that sort. Charlie?
My guess is over the next 5 years we'll do some of both the entire business and the big gulps in the stock market.
Yeah, I agree with that. We'll keep working at both. We're not finding a lot in either arena. We might be a little more likely to find it in the negotiated business. It won't be any huge bargain. We're not going to get any huge bargain in a negotiated purchase. We are more likely to find what I would call a fair deal there under today's circumstances than we will in the market. But I agree with Charlie. Over the next 5 years, I think you'll see us do both. Zone 6.
Good morning, Mr. Buffett, Mr. Munger. My name is Jane Bell from Des Moines, Iowa. In response to an earlier question, you spoke of people being rich and very, very rich. It seems to me there's a difference between being rich and being wealthy. I assume you consider yourself to be both. Which is the more important to you?
Well, I think we may ask you to define. I don't want to sound like President Clinton here too much, but we may ask you. I might want, if you'd really define the rich and wealthy so that I get the distinction, then I think we can give you a better answer on it.
Well, in my mind, being rich is having an awful lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
Being very, very rich is having even more. And being wealthy doesn't necessarily equate to having a lot of money.
But what does it equate to then? I just want. I think I know what you mean, but I still want you to clear it up before I give you an answer on it.
Well, this, of course, is my opinion.
I mean, you could be wealthy in health, for example, and I agree with you that certainly there'd be nothing you'd value more than good health for yourself and your family. But you go ahead.
Well, I believe you're starting to get it.
Mm-hmm. Have patience. No, there's no question about it. I mean, the money makes very little difference after a moderate level. I tell this to college students that I talk to. I mean, they are basically living about the same life I'm living. We eat the same foods. I mean, that I can guarantee you. And there's no important difference in our dress. There's no important difference at all in the car we drive. There's no difference in the television set that we sit there and watch the Super Bowl on or anything of the sort. There's really no difference in they've got air conditioning in summer and I got air conditioning. They got heat in winter. And almost everything. So any importance in daily life, we equate on it. The one thing I do is I travel a lot better than they do. Net jets. So the travel I do a lot easier than they do. Everything else in their lives, it just I'll switch places anytime. It doesn't make any difference. Then you get down to the things of health and who loves you. I mean that's. Then you get down to the things of health and who loves you. I mean that's there's nothing. If you have a minimum level of, you want to have enough, but everybody in this room has that, and yet some of the people, by the definition that you've given, are obviously much more wealthy than others, and it's not measured by their net worth if you define it that way. And I don't disagree with that definition. I might not use the term wealth in describing it, but I'd certainly maybe call it well-being or something of the sort. Charlie? He's thinking.
Sure, there are a lot of things in life way more important than wealth. All that said, some people do get confused. I play golf with a man, he says, "What good is health? You can't buy money with it."
Did I ever tell you about Charlie's twin brother that he golfs a lot with? No, I'll take health anytime, incidentally.
Yeah. So will I.
No, the important thing, even in your work, I mean, is to an extreme extent, it seems to me, is who you do it with. I mean, you can have, if you're going to spend 8 hours a day working, the most important thing isn't how much you can have. If you're going to spend 8 hours a day working, the most important thing isn't how much money. Well, you know, I consider myself incredibly lucky in that respect. I can't think of anything I'd rather do, and I can't think of any group of people I'd rather do it with. And if you asked me to trade away a very significant percentage of my net worth, either for some extra years or being able to do during those years what I want to do, you know, I'd do it in a second. Zone 7.
Hi, my name is McCall Bang. I'm from Central Florida. It's nice and sunny there.
Not so bad here either now.
My question was, last year somebody asked about the pharmaceutical companies and the aging baby boomers, etc. And you said it was difficult to single out and the aging baby boomers, etc. And you said it was difficult to single out individual companies, and I believe Mr. Munger succinctly said that we blew it on that one. Of what happened in 92, 93 with an unelected politician kind of dampened the whole industry for a period there. If that plays a part in giving you a little ambivalence about investing in that area for the future, is that simply an unknowable, or with all the, you know, a lot of the political things we see here today, if that causes you some concern about the future of that area? I know that you're concerned about the growth of companies having to spend money in Washington with regulation, etc. So I'd like to know your thoughts, specifically if you have some ambivalence because of future regulation with pharmaceutical companies.
Well, if we could buy a group of leading pharmaceutical companies at a below market multiple, I think we'd do it in a second. And we had the opportunity to do that in that 1993 period, as you mentioned, and we didn't do it. So we did blow it. That 1993 period, as you mentioned, and we didn't do it. So we did blow it. As a whole has done very well, and it had threats that you enumerated in terms of regulation and so on. But, you know, every industry has some problems, and the pharmaceutical industry has enough going for it that the threats you name should not cause, in my view, should not cause the securities to sell at a depressed multiple, which they did. Now, that's no longer the circumstance. We don't like, you know, we're not going to buy them at present prices, but you know, at least I think they're very, you know, as a group, they're good businesses. I do think it's very hard to pick out the winner, you know. So if I did buy them, I would buy a group of the leading companies, but I wouldn't be buying them at these prices. Charlie?
Yeah, I would argue that the pharmaceutical industry has done more good for the customers than almost any other industry in America. It's just fabulous what's been invented in my lifetime, starting with all the antibiotics that have prevented so much death and so much family tragedy. And I think the country has been very wise to have a system where the pharmaceutical companies can make almost obscene amounts of money. I think we've all been well served by the large profits in the pharmaceutical industry.
Zone 8.
Good morning, Mr. Buffett, Mr. Munger. My name is Gary Rostrom from right here in Omaha. My question is, somewhere I thought I've read that you buy at least one share of every company on the New York or on the exchanges to get the annual report. Is that true, or is that a thing of the past? And if it is true, how do you keep track of all that information?
Well, it's got an element of truth in it. Many years ago, I did buy one share of a great many companies, and I'd get these dividend checks for 8 cents and 10 cents, and I used to pay my bridge losses by endorsing these checks by the hundreds and giving them to the people who just won $1.80, and then no one asked me to bridge games anymore. So I have adopted a new program where I buy 100 shares of a great many companies. I buy them in my foundation so I don't go crazy at income tax time. And I probably, just as a guess, would have a couple hundred companies. So it isn't every company by a long shot. But there are at least several hundred companies where I want to be a registered shareholder and to make sure I get the mailings promptly. And I do keep those around. And even after I lose interest, I very seldom sell one, so I'll just keep buying more. And I'll not only buy the 100 shares in something I might want to keep track of, but I'll probably buy 100 shares in all of their competitors, and so that I keep reading about those companies as well. It does pay to have a flow of information come in over the desk, and the answer to that question reminds me of a point which I'd like to bring up briefly here, and that is that our shareholders, unfortunately, there's no way around this, unless they go to the internet on the Saturday that we designate to read the annual report, and where it's up on our home site, BerkshireHathaway.com, are going to receive their reports at significantly different times. And the ones who have their shares in their own names are very likely to get those reports faster than the ones that have their shares held in street names. And from our standpoint, unfortunately, probably 90% of the shareholders we have their stock held in street names. Now, what happens on that is we print the reports up. We mail the ones to the shareholders who are of record, who have the stock in their own names. We send the balance to where their brokers or bankers tell us to send them. Well, about 90% go to one place in New Jersey, but that's out of our control. I mean, if Merrill Lynch or Charles Schwab or whomever, Fidelity, turns their list over to that, or whomever, Fidelity, turns their list over to that, we may next year try to figure out a way to. It's out of our control when those reports go out. So our shareholders receive their reports on widely varying dates, which, like I say, I would rather not have that happen. It means that in terms of sending in your request for tickets to this meeting, many people we had this year, as late as maybe the 10th of April, still hadn't gotten their reports, and they wondered about their tickets. So if it's convenient for you, you will, it's better to have your stock in your own name. Now, that isn't convenient for many people, I understand that, but you will get our reports on a more reliable basis and a more prompt basis if you do it that way. If you have your stock in street name, I urge you to look on those dates we've laid out in the report for next year, to click on to our home page, because then you will have the information just as quickly as everybody, as your fellow to our home page, because then you will have the information just as quickly as everybody, as your fellow clients, to the information as close to simultaneously as possible, and during a time when the market is not open. We think that just makes sense. That's the way we would do it if we were running a partnership. But there is this problem with street name holdings of somewhat erratic distribution, and that's the reason why, when I want to keep track of, say, all of the companies in the pharmaceutical industry, I'll buy 100 shares of each one, and I'll stick them in the name of the foundation, and that mailing comes directly to me in Omaha. So let's go on to Zone 9.
I'm Lola Wells from Florida. You have been recently quoted in the newspapers as saying that some major corporations have used questionable practices to make their operations seem more favorable. Would you be willing to be more specific about these practices?
Not until I'm on my deathbed. I have followed a policy of criticizing by practice and praising by name, and we will not. We do. Charlie and I both find certain practices very, very deplorable, and they aren't limited to a single or a few large corporations. But we would probably be less effective in arguing for change if we went to a few specific examples. They would not be that much different probably than hundreds of other, or at least dozens of other companies. And secondly, those who get critical of the world find the world gets very critical of them promptly. And I think we do more good by, in a sense, hating the sin and loving the sinner. So I think we do more good by, in a sense, hating the sin and loving the sinner. So
You to name the practices,
Oh, the
not the miscreants.
No. Well, the practices are some of the things we've said. They relate to accounting charges that are designed to throw into a subsequent periods in the earnings smooth out or to inflate earnings in future accounts. There's a lot of that being done. There's a lot of it's been done. The SEC under Arthur Levitt, who I admire enormously for his efforts on this, is making a concerted attempt to get a corporate America to clean up its act on that. But it'll only be because somebody hits them over the head. I mean, it has become totally fashionable to play games with the timing of expenses and revenues, and frankly, until the SEC got tougher, in my view, the auditors were not doing enough about it. I think that in terms of hiding compensation expense and not recording it in the case of options and all of that, I think companies now have the option of recording option costs in the income account, but you have not seen any great flood of people doing it. And actually, the way they show it in the footnotes is quite deceptive in my view, because they try to make assumptions that minimize what the income account impact would be, but the cost to the shareholder is what counts. I mean, that is the compensation cost as far as we're concerned, and that's been minimized. The whole effort to engage in pooling rather than purchase accounting has seen a lot of there's been a lot of deceptive accounting in that respect. There's been deceptive accounting on purchase accounting adjustments. So those are the kind of things we're talking about. Charlie?
Yeah, it's the big bath accounting and the subsequent release back into earnings of taking an overly large bath that create a lot of the abuse.
We could name names, we won't. But I mean, we have seen firsthand managements who think they are doing, they say they're doing what everybody else does. The truth is they are now, because everybody else is doing it. And it takes some outside force, in this case probably the SEC, it should have been the auditors, to clean up the act. With the SEC, it should have been the auditors, to clean up the act, because once it becomes prevalent, the fellow who says I'm going to do it fair and square, and he says, why should I penalize my shareholders by doing something when legally I can get away with doing something else? Charlie?
Nothing more.
Good morning, Mr. Buffett and Mr. Munger. My name is Robert McClure, and my wife and I live in Singapore. My question concerns insurance. In the 1994 annual report, you made the following remarks, and I quote, "A prudent insurer will want its protection against true mega catastrophes, such as a $50 billion windstorm loss on Long Island or an earthquake of similar cost in California, to be absolutely certain. That same insurer knows that the disaster making it dependent on a large supercat recovery is also the disaster that could cause many reinsurers to default. There's not much sense in paying premiums for coverages that will evaporate precisely when they are needed. So the certainty premiums for coverages that will evaporate precisely when they are needed. So the certainty, thinkable proportions, is a major competitive advantage for us," end quote. As I said, that was in the 1994 annual report. Please give us an update on those remarks. Would you say that that competitive advantage you described is intact, or would you go so far to say that it has been enhanced over the past 5 years with the merger of General Re and with what's happened in the super cat insurance industry?
Yeah, I would say that reputation, certainly the reputation is it's stronger than ever. I mean, Berkshire's preeminent position, it's stronger than ever. I mean, Berkshire's preeminent position after any conceivable natural disaster, that reputation is stronger today than it's ever been, and General Re's reputation right along with it. I would say the commercial advantage inherent in that reputation is very important. I can't tell you exactly how it rates compared to 1994, but I can tell you that it's important. It tends to be more important when we're reinsuring other very large entities, either primary insurers or large reinsurers, than it is with a smaller company. The smaller company probably focuses on that less. But we are writing probably this week a very large cover for a very important reinsurer. I don't think they'd want to buy that from almost anyone else. I mean, a couple of people maybe, but they could decide not to buy it from us because they might not feel they wanted to buy it. I think in this case they will. But I don't think they would have a list of 10 people from whom they'd buy it. And they're too smart for that because it's a very high-level cover. And if that is called upon, there will be a number of people whose checks will not clear, and Berkshire's check undoubtedly will clear. So it is a number of people whose checks will not clear, and Berkshire's check undoubtedly will clear. So it is a big advantage, is significant. How much it translates into, that can vary from year to year. But I think it's a permanent advantage that Berkshire will have. I mean, I think 5 years from now and 10 years from now, and particularly after there has been a huge super cat, it will be a great asset to Berkshire to be thought of as essentially, as I've described it, as Fort Knox. And we will pay under any circumstances. And there aren't many people in the insurance or reinsurance business that can truly say that. And when the very big cover comes along, we should have very few competitors. Charlie?
Well, I think that's exactly right.
Okay, Zone 11.
Good morning. Richard Corrie from England. Could you please say what was the main factor which produced the very substantial gain in intrinsic value mentioned in your report? I ask this because per share gains in portfolio and operating profits were modest, and you said there was no immediate gain from issuing shares for acquisitions.
Well, we did increase the float per share very significantly last year. I mean, the invested assets per share. And I would say that GEICO's business was worth far more at the end of the year than at the start of the year, and that was our largest subsidiary at the start of the year. And if anything, GEICO's competitive position continues to improve. I would say that Executive Jet is a natural fit into Berkshire, and we paid a significant sum for it, but that it will be a very, very big company 10 or 15 years from now. And perhaps, well, I'm almost sure it'll get there sooner as part of Berkshire than it would have gotten there otherwise. And its dominance may be even greater over the years as part of the Berkshire family otherwise. And its dominance may be even greater over the years as part of the Berkshire family. It started early, and they had the most service-oriented company you could imagine. So it would have done fine without us, but I think it will do even considerably better and get there faster. It would have done fine without us, but I think it will do even considerably better and get there faster, certainly in the primary in intrinsic value. And I think that additionally we had a significantly greater amount of invested assets per share to work with. So I feel good about what happened with intrinsic value last year. The problem is doing it year after year after year. Charlie?
Just basically, we have a wonderful bunch of businesses, and we have a float that keeps increasing and a pretty good record of doing pretty well in marketable securities. None of that has gone away.
Zone 12.
Hello, my name is Elias Canner, and I am from New York City. Mr. Buffett, thank you for this entire weekend. I met you at the ball game on Saturday and at Goratz yesterday. It was a great honor for me each time.
Thank you.
My question is this. Mr. Buffett, will you groom a younger man or woman as your heir apparent? If so, when might you do this? When I say younger, I mean a person 15 to 20 years younger than yourself. Of course, I'm not complaining. You're the best in the world.
Well, 15 or 20 years younger is a lot easier to do than it used to be. A large percentage of the world's population is now eligible. We have today the people to take over Berkshire. There's no problem about that at all. They have been named in letters that the directors have, and they are in place. Exactly who will be the two people will, of course, or it could be one person, will depend on when Charlie and I are out of the picture. I mean, if we'd written the letter 10 years ago, it might have been different than today. It might be different 15 years from now. So our death or incapacity, the timing of it will determine exactly who will be the current person in that letter. But we have those people in place. They don't need to be groomed from this point forward. They exist. They're ready. They'd be ready to run Berkshire tomorrow morning, and I think you'd be quite pleased with the job they did, and that's why I don't worry about having. I've got 99 3/4% of my net worth in Berkshire, and I don't want any of it sold. If I knew I was going to die next week, I would not want it sold in the coming week, and I don't want it sold after I die. I feel very comfortable with the businesses and the managers and the successor top management that we have at Berkshire, but I just don't want them to take over too early. Charlie?
Yeah, I actually think that the prospects for continuity of corporate culture, to the extent we have one, at Berkshire is higher than prospects for continuity of corporate culture at most other large public companies. I don't see Berkshire changing its way of operating, even if Warren were to expire tonight. And I think that the capital, the fresh cash, would be allocated less well. But as I've said at past shareholder meetings, well, that's too damn bad.
That's why we don't have a public relations department.
By the way, I don't think the job would be ill done. I just don't think it would be done quite as well as Warren does it.
Okay, Zone 13.
Good morning, Mr. Buffett and Mr. Munger. I'm Cary Blecker from Wellington, Florida. Thank you for stopping by the convention center before, Mr. Buffett. It was nice to see you again.
My pleasure.
Recently, much has been made of the fact that Berkshire is the largest company to not be included in the S&P 500. Do you gentlemen have an opinion or what is your opinion as to whether Berkshire should be included and why? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a question we've gotten asked quite often since the General Re deal was announced. Berkshire, if you talk to the S&P people, I think they would say, and I think they've even said it publicly, or at least a representative has, that we certainly qualify in every way that, except from what they might term the liquidity standpoint. It's probable that maybe it's 6%, maybe 7% of the investment funds, the equity funds in the United States are indexed, and the number is, or the amount is going up somewhat as we go along. I saw an article to the contrary on that, but I think they had it wrong. The amount of money, index money, is, in my view, rising month by month. So if you were to put Berkshire into the index tomorrow, in effect, you'd have a market order to buy 6 to 7% of the company, or roughly 100,000 shares of A. That would not be good. The stock would obviously spike up dramatically, as some stocks already have when they've been added. There have been some. I've looked at the list of all the companies that have been added, and some have moved up substantially. And we would have there'd be even more impact at Berkshire than the typical stock, because our stock is fairly tightly held. Most people don't want to sell it. There are two solutions to that. Three solutions, being one of them being not to put us in the index. But we are I think probably the most significant company in the United States that isn't in the index in terms of market value and a lot of other factors. So if you want to put Berkshire or a company like it in the index and not have some crazy market aberration, you could have one of two things happen. And this would be true, I think, more and more of other companies as well as they add them to the index and as more money gets indexed. One, you could have the company agree that at the time it was added to the index, that simultaneously the company itself would sell an amount of stock that was about equal to the index buying that would be generated. In other words, if we were to offer 100,000 shares roughly of A stock at the same time as being added to the index, that would neutralize the index buying. The only problem with that is we don't want to sell 100,000 shares or 10,000 shares or 100 shares of A stock at Berkshire unless we have some very good use for the money. It isn't going to happen. So we're not going to do something like that just because we want to be in an index. The other possibility, and I believe this was used in Australia when a very large mutual life company converted to stock. I think it was the largest company. A very large mutual life company converted to stock. I think it was the largest company. And that would be to phase in the weighting, say, over a 12-month period, so that it was 1/12 weighted the first month, 1/12 weighted the second month, and so on. That means, in effect, there would have to be a market order once a month for a 0.5% roughly of Berkshire. Well, I don't think that would be very particularly disruptive. And I think there would be, once you knew that phase-in was coming, there would be some anticipation so that you would not get big spikes in the stock and dips subsequently. I think that would be a logical way, but Standard & Poor's to date has not had to do that sort of thing, and they may have various reasons and various good reasons for not wanting to do that. Now, if indexation continues to grow as it has, and you get a situation where 15% of the money becomes indexed, I think they're going to have to come up with some approach similar to one of these two that I've named, or that it will simply get too disruptive to the market. It would be interesting. I know American Online has behaved very well since it was introduced to the S&P some time back, but I would think that it might get to be the case that if you simply shorted the companies that got added to the S&P after the S&P effect had been felt, you might find that those stocks would tend to underperform as that one artificial buy order, in effect, its impact wore off. So I think something is going to happen. I think indexation has far exceeded what anybody anticipated, including S&P or including me or Charlie, and I think there's been a good reason for it to develop. I think as it continues to develop, it will have more and more impact on the market in ways that probably S&P is not that excited about, nor would the index funds be excited about. So there is likely to come a solution to the liquidity problem that might be particularly acute at Berkshire, but that prevails throughout the market that occurs when stocks are added. And I would think if they adopt some solution, that certainly if they adopted the solution of gradual weighting, that Berkshire would be a very logical candidate for the S&P. It really makes no difference to us what is done along that line. We would not be unhappy being in the S&P as long as it didn't have some huge market impact at the moment of putting it in. On the other hand, we love the owners we've got, and I don't see how we could improve on this group much by having the index funds. So we'll see what happens on it. It is not a big deal to us, and we want to be sure if we're ever at it, it isn't too big a deal to the market, because I would not like, the people who sold that day might like it, but I would not like the stock to jump up, $20,000 a share on one day because there's some market order for 100,000 shares and then gradually work its way back down to where it should have been in the first place. No one benefits from that except the people who sell in the very short term, and that is not the group that I primarily worry about. Charlie?
My guess is that Berkshire will eventually be in the S&P index. Somebody will figure out how to do that sensibly. Maybe not soon, but someday.
Okay. Zone